Are you ready for today's story? Today we're going to read The Biggest Pumpkin Ever. Look how huge it is! That is the biggest pumpkin I've ever seen. Did you ever see a pumpkin that big? This story was written by Stephen Kroll. He's the author. And illustrated by Jenny Bassett. She's the illustrator. She made the pictures. And it was published by Scholastic. Scholastic put it together. Looks like vegetables in a vegetable garden. And there is the house. And it belongs to a mouse. House, mouse. House, mouse. That's a rhyme. And he's pointing out to the garden. See? And here we see a teeny tiny baby pumpkin. It's still green. It's not ripe to be picked yet. How do we know when it's going to be ripe? What color will it turn? Orange. Right. And there's the tiny little pumpkin. Getting a little bigger. Once there were two mice who fell in love with the same pumpkin. Clayton, the house mouse, noticed it one day in the vegetable garden. It was still little and green, but Clayton thought he could make it grow really big. It might even get big enough to win the grand prize at the town pumpkin contest. He wants to grow it big and put it in a contest to get a prize. Desmond, the field mouse, discovered the pumpkin the same day. He thought if he helped it grow, it could become the biggest jack-o'-lantern in the neighborhood. So they both thought that they found that pumpkin first. And Clayton wants to put it in a contest, and Desmond wants to carve it for a jack-o'-lantern. If he carves it for a jack-o'-lantern, can it go in the contest? No. That afternoon, Clayton watered the pumpkin. He also mixed up some fertilizer of manure and water, that's plant food. He spread the mixture around the pumpkin to make it grow. So he's taking care of it. That very same night, Desmond went into the garden. He watered the pumpkin too. He also spread some manure mixed with water around it. So they're both watering it, and they're both giving it plant food. What happens when you eat too much food? You get really big. The next day, Clayton watered and fertilized the pumpkin again. The next night, Desmond did the same thing, and the pumpkin began to grow. Do, do, do. By the end of a month, the pumpkin was so large, Clayton couldn't believe his eyes. Wow, look how big it got. My goodness, said Clayton's mother, and it's not even full grown. It's not full grown because it's still green. Clayton shrugged. Do you know what shrug means? Shrug, you do like this with your shoulders, like when you're like, I don't know. So he shrugged. Clayton shrugged. All I do is water it, he said. Clayton's mother whispered in his ear. If you want the pumpkin to grow bigger faster, she said, you should use sugar water. Oh, that's a good trick. Give it some sugar water. That night, Desmond brought his brother Morris to see the pumpkin. Morris knew everything there was to know about growing things. That's some pumpkin, he said. Desmond shrugged. All I do is water it, he said. Morris whispered in his ear. You should try using some sugar water. Hey, the mom and the brother, they both had the same idea. The next day, Clayton dug a small hole beside the pumpkin vine. In the hole, he placed a bowl of sugar water. He cut into the vine a few inches from the pumpkin, and in the cut, he put one end of a piece of candle wick. Then he put the other end in the bowl of sugar water. That night, on the other side of the pumpkin, see, it's over here is this side, and then on this side, Desmond is doing it. Does he see what Clayton did? No, he's doing it on this side. That night, on the other side of the pumpkin, Desmond did exactly the same thing. So what they did is they cut into the pumpkin and put this wick in there, and the wick is helping it to be like a straw, and it's going to suck up the sugar water. But it's getting 2 drinks of sugar water, not just one. Within a week, the pumpkin was twice the size it had been. And within 2 weeks, it was absolutely enormous. But is it ready to be picked yet? Nope, it's still not ripe. Clayton was amazed. He ran down the road and peeked at his friend Jimmy's pumpkin patch. The pumpkin Jimmy was growing for the contest looked much smaller. Clayton scratched his head. That's like a confused thing. Huh? He scratched his head. I have an amazing pumpkin, he said out loud, and I think I'm going to win the contest. That night, Desmond and his brother Morris spent a long time looking at the pumpkin. How do you think it got that big? Desmond asked. Morris shrugged. A little luck, a little skill. It's going to make some jack-o'-lantern, said Desmond. It sure is, said Morris. There it is. It's still growing and growing. And look down here. A week later, Clayton noticed the pumpkin was bigger than the family car. During the day, everyone he knew came to admire it. Admire it means they came to look at it. They're like, oh, wow, that's wonderful. It's when you look at something in amazement, you're like, wow. At night, the field mice gathered around to do the same. Wow, they're saying. By now, summer was almost over. In a week, the pumpkin would be full grown and start turning yellowish and then orange. A few weeks after that, it would be ripe and ready for the pumpkin contest. Clayton could hardly wait. The pumpkin was growing so fast, it would soon be larger than his house. Then he had a terrible, terrible thought. If the pumpkin was so big, how would he get it to the contest? How will he get it to the contest? He can't pick it up. It's bigger than the car. How is he going to do that? Oh, man. It wouldn't fit in his red wagon. It wouldn't even fit in a truck. Clayton decided to worry about this when the time came. All right, let's see what's happening here. What are they putting on the pumpkin? Blankets. Why would you put blankets on a pumpkin? You put a blanket on if you're chilly, right? Chilly and cold. That night, the weather grew colder. Thinking there might be an early frost. A frost is when a little bit of ice gets on things because it's so cold. And if a little bit of ice gets on the pumpkin or other vegetables and fruits and things growing in the garden and even flowers, if frost gets on it, it'll make them dead. So that's why they have to protect it. Thinking there might be an early frost, Clayton rushed out to the pumpkin with his blanket. One was not enough. Soon he was rushing back and forth carrying all the blankets from the house. As he worked, he hummed a little song. And as he hummed, he heard someone else singing. La 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 la. He also began to realize that someone else was covering the pumpkin with blankets. Desmond, too, had seen the danger of an early frost. He, too, had brought the blankets for the pumpkin. And as he worked, he sang a little song. La 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 la. And as he sang, he began to realize that someone else was working and humming. Clayton stopped humming. He put down his pile of blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. Peered means he went like this. Like peeking. Desmond stopped singing. He put down his blankets and peered around the corner of the pumpkin. The two of them bumped heads and fell down. "You've been feeding the pumpkin," said Clayton. "You've been feeding the pumpkin," said Desmond. "That's why it got so big," said Clayton. "That's why it got so big," said Desmond. They burst out laughing. They think that's so funny. But we have a problem. They both want to use the pumpkin for two different reasons. How are they going to solve that problem? Let's see. When everything had been explained, Clayton said, "I know I'll win the contest if I can get the pumpkin to town." Desmond smiled. "I'll help you. Just let me carve the pumpkin into a jack-o'-lantern for Halloween when the contest is over." "That's a good idea. Wait until after the contest to make it into a jack-o'-lantern. That's good problem solving." "It's a deal," said Clayton. "A deal," said Desmond, and they shook on it. Shook on it means when you make a deal and you shake hands like that, that means it's a sealed deal. The morning of the contest was bright and sunny. Mice are bringing their pumpkins to the town square by truck and car and wagon. Some were rolling them along. Look at all those pumpkins. Compared to the one that Desmond and Clayton made, these ones are kind of small. Here comes their pumpkin, and how is it getting there? Suddenly, they all stopped short. Over the fields came the biggest pumpkin anyone had ever seen. It was being pulled by 100 field mice on motorcycles. When the pumpkin reached town, it was too big for any of the streets. Clayton had to explain why they couldn't bring it to the square. The mayor understood at once. He led the crowd to the giant pumpkin and pinned the first prize ribbon onto the side. They won! Yay! Then everyone danced around it. "Who would have believed this?" said Clayton as he danced. "Who would have believed this?" said Desmond as he did the same at the same time. Oh, now the contest is over. Now they can make the jack-o'-lantern. When the celebration was over, the 100 field mice pulled the pumpkin back to the field. The day before Halloween, they carved it into the best jack-o'-lantern ever. What are all of these things over here? They came from inside the pumpkin. They're the seeds. And on Halloween night, its wonderful, smiling face could be seen glowing for miles around. There you go, friends. Do you know what I love about this story? I love that the two mice did teamwork. They solved a problem and they shared. Those are wonderful things to do. Teamwork, problem solving, and sharing. I'm so glad I could share this book with you. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you later. Bye now.